Hello, everyone. My name is Jon McGraw. I'm a 10-year NFL veteran, co-founder at Vision Pursue, and I'm on the game plan.
Well, Jon, thanks for joining us. You played 10 years in the NFL as a safety. At what point in that journey did you start to think about life outside of football and even the idea of becoming an entrepreneur?
Yeah, well, I was definitely thinking about a business and being an entrepreneur before football even started. Studied finance, business school at Kansas State. So I was always very interested. My dad was an entrepreneur, so grew up around that. So loved business, especially being an entrepreneur. So when I got to the NFL, I knew that it wasn't going to last very long. Even if I ended up having a long career, which I did relatively, it's still, you just never know when it's going to be over. So I was always thinking about what's life going to look like after football, and assumed I would get involved in some type of business afterwards.
Was there anybody either in the locker room or other guys you knew in the league that you really looked up to and admired, either how they transitioned out of the league or some of the things that they were working on outside of football?
That's a great question. No one comes to mind specifically. But I do think that there are always guys that I looked up to in the NFL and how they handled themselves as professionals, right? And how they showed up, right? Not just what they did in the football field, but how they went about their business. And I learned a lot from those guys early on, from Benny Testaverde and Wayne Corbett and Curtis Martin and guys that were, had established themselves in the NFL when I first got to the Jets. And so really admired that. We didn't talk a whole lot of business in the locker room typically. And it always felt like there was this balance between giving football and what you're doing now your entire focus, and knowing that you've got a small window of opportunity to take advantage, and not wanting to distract yourselves with too many other things, at the same time knowing there's going to be life after football and wanting to prepare yourself as best you can for that. So felt like there was a little bit of a tension there, and I think some guys managed that tension well and some guys maybe not so much.
Yeah, I think there's certainly a little bit more acceptance now to at least be able to talk about some of the stuff that guys are interested in off the field or off the court. That's definitely what we kind of get into here on the game plan. But you still have to deliver on the field. That's all that ultimately matters. What are some of the best skills you had as a player that you've now carried into your journey as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I think one that's really helped me and that I learned as a walk-on at Kansas State was and I can't remember if it was Bill Gates or someone famous like that once said, we overestimate what we can do in a year and we underestimate what we can do in 10 years, right? And committing yourself to a process and trusting that process and being able to stick to it, it's really amazing what the mind and the body can do and what we're able to accomplish over a given period of time. And too often we get too discouraged when we don't see the results right away. And so I was able to see that play out in my football career, and that transitioned into business really well, because it's taken a while for us to get going. And it just takes time. And I love the overnight success illusion that happens in both for athletes and in the business world, right? Where all of a sudden you come on people's radar and like, oh, wow, it must be nice to just hit it big time. They don't see everything that went into the process of getting there.
Yeah, that's right. One of the things I read that you had written was talking about how you were so focused on a high performance job, like playing in the NFL. Obviously, every week, the toll that it takes, not just on you physically, but also the mental preparation that has to go into going out there every week. And then there was a point in time that your mindset shifted where you started to actually enjoy that. So help me understand that a little bit. And what was it, before we get into the company itself, what was it about that mindset shift that you made?
Yeah, there's a really important principle in performance psychology that's sometimes referred to as process orientation. And as high performers, we can get very consumed with the end result, the outcome, right? The thing that we're going after. And sometimes to such an extent that it diminishes the quality we bring to the process of actually getting there. And the process is really important because it's what ultimately creates the outcomes that we're going after. And sometimes when we're so goal oriented, the process starts to feel like a stressful means to an end. And that was a lot of my sport experience and football experience. And I was getting enough external rewards because I had enough talent and I had enough work ethic that I could push through it. But a lot of the process of playing my sport wasn't a great experience for me. And I want to be real clear. It wasn't because of what I was doing. It was because of how I was experiencing it. And it was how my mind was converting the daily grind into a stressful means to an end. And so that was a really big wake up call for me towards the end of my NFL career. What happened, I stumbled upon this principle by accident. My environment with the Chiefs, I was with them at the time, forced me to make this mindset shift where I stopped focusing so much on the end result and on making the team and on game day, and just began to really enjoy playing football again. And so it's more of a focus. It's where we place our attention. And what's great about that is we have a lot more control over the process typically in life than we do the end results. And you see this in youth sports. You see it when people get burnt out in whatever they're doing. Typically, it's because they're so focused on the end result. And it wears them out. It's just too much. And so I had to make that shift. And my performance went up. My enjoyment of the game went up my last few years in the NFL. And it really fascinated me how one small mindset shift could make such a huge difference.
Recently, I have had this idea pop into my head, and it reminds me of like what a high school coach used to say to me all the time, which was, well, hopefully he wasn't saying it to me, but I remember hearing this, which was don't go through the motions. But it created this expectation that every single practice or rep or lift was going to be the greatest lift you ever had or the greatest workout you ever had. And we had Femi Ayambadejo on, who started a company called Health Reel, and he talks about the most important, or the factors of fitness and working out are duration, intensity, and frequency. And people get confused and they over-index towards how hard or how intense that workout is when the fountain of youth is actually walking 35 minutes a day. So you just made me think back to this idea that I've been reflecting on, which is about going through the motions, where actually going through the motions isn't necessarily a bad thing. Now, there's a time and place to perform really well and to be focused, and you don't want to just go through the motions every day, but some days you do need to just show up and have that as the starting place for success. Would you agree with that?
I would, and I would encourage a lot of people that are listening to this, especially youth. I mean, half the battle in life is just showing up, like just getting there, right? And having the courage to show up, even though you don't know exactly how it's going to play out, and give yourself the chance. And then a lot of times, if you have the courage to just show up in life in whatever respect, you'll be surprised at what you're able to do, right, and accomplish. And so I agree. I think there's times when we commit to a system or a process and we trust that process. And sometimes we're going to show up and it's going to be an event and it's going to be the most amazing workout of my life or the most amazing Zoom training that I've ever done. And sometimes it's just going to be what it is, right? It's just going to be the best I can do that day and not trying to make it something that it's not and bring your best self every day.
Yeah, I was going to map that to the point you were making earlier about, creating the expectation to be less about the end result and more about the journey and the progress. When every NFL team shows up on, preseason week 1, in their head, they're all thinking, this is our year. This is the year we make it to the Super Bowl. And unfortunately, only one team at the end of the season wins. So when you're in that environment, when you're in that pressure where obviously there's individual pressures, guys have contracts, they have goals they want to hit, but then every team has that same goal. How do you balance your mindset of, hey, it's about the journey versus the team's mindset of it's Super Bowl or nothing, baby?
Yeah, I think a lot of teams and coaches do a pretty good job of helping reorient guys back. Because when you get into the season, like, we know what the ultimate goal is. Like they don't have to remind us at the beginning of the season what we're playing for, right? And so we all know that in the back of our mind. And we also know if you don't get to the NFL or play at the highest level without developing some level of discipline and commitment to the process and being able to, in Navy SEALs, they call it segmenting, right? Not getting so focused on biting off more than you can chew, just saying, okay, how can I get a little bit better today? And when you look at, I got to play for one of the great college coaches, Bill Snyder at Kansas State, and then you've got Bill Belichick, Nick Saban, a lot of these coaches, their philosophy is not how do we win championships. They don't even talk about championships. They just talk about how can we get better today. What are the few things we have control over today that's going to help us get better? And if you start to stack enough of those days on top of each other, you give yourself the best chance to win a championship.
Yeah. So, Jon, let's actually get into the superhero origin story of Vision Pursue and talk to us a little bit about how it went from the idea of the performance mindset into the business that you're building today.
Yeah, absolutely. So the genesis in terms of the philosophy for me was really around concussions. So I had a lot of concussions, played safety, was concerned a lot about my long-term brain health, turned down, a contract with the Chiefs towards the end of my career because I was of that concern. And as I began to study as much neuroscience as I could to understand traumatic brain injury and CTE and all the PTSD, all the things that can affect former NFL players, anyone who's had a traumatic brain injury, I was just fascinated. I was blown away about what we were learning about the brain and some of how the brain works. And the neuroscience got me into health psychology, which is understanding the relationship between the mind, the brain, and the body, and how our neurology affects our physiology and vice versa. And it was just this whole new world opened up to me. And I remember thinking at one point, how in the world did I spend 10 years in one of the highest competitive environments in the world and no one was talking about this? Because the implications are huge. I mean, they're absolutely huge for performance, for recovery, things that professional athletes care a lot about and professional sports teams should care a lot about. No one was talking about this. The health psychology introduced me to performance psychology, which is where I really began to understand, for example, process orientation we talked about earlier, and mental skills training. What just like we train the body on a regular basis, we have to be training the mind on a regular basis, not X's and O's. This isn't football IQ. This is how we respond to our own automatic brain, how we respond to our own programming, how all the judgments and expectations happen. We're all meaning makers. And based on our program, based on our experiences, it's constructing meaning from all of our experiences, which is dictating how I show up in a moment. So there was this whole world of mental skills training was opened up to me. And it was all just personal, trying to figure out, okay, what are ways that I can prolong my brain health and be the best dad I can be the best person, human being I can be. And then was very fortunate to, a couple years after I began that journey, a couple years after retiring, met my business partner, Russ Rausch. He had a very successful corporate career. And in technology, the hedge fund space, was just a really, really brilliant guy. And we were on similar paths. He was developing a mindset training program for the hedge fund that he was at. And we developed a friendship and I began advising. And then pretty soon we were business partners and trying to make this thing work.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic to hear. And, as you have started to develop the business, one place that I always love to hear from first-time entrepreneurs is what was the most surprising thing or what was the hardest thing about actually getting the business off the ground? You mentioned earlier that it took longer than you might have expected. So help us understand what were some of those challenges that you maybe didn't foresee?
Oh goodness, we could spend a lot of time on this subject. I didn't know what I didn't know, right? And you kind of think it can't be that hard, it can't be that complicated. In some ways, it's not. Some ways, business is very simple. In other ways, it's just very complex. And so, understanding that first trying to figure out, is there a market for this? Which I personally didn't think there was. My business partner had convinced me that this was a legitimate business venture. And he was seeing it. He was seeing the corporate world. And I just began to realize, wow, how impactful would this type of training been for me early in my career? And I'm telling you, it would have been a game changer. I mean, I would have enjoyed my career way more. I would have made a ton more money. I would have had less injuries. I would have been able to recover faster. So I've been like, okay, if it would have really helped me, then there's a chance it could help other people. So in terms of then taking an idea and a concept and then converting that into an actual product, or service, I think that part of the execution has been the most challenging. And I'm very thankful that I've got an amazing business partner, and that's what he does. I mean, he thinks in terms of systems and processes, and he can take concepts in theory and convert them and package them in a way that's practical and can really add value to people. So I think for me, at least, having someone like him to advise and mentor me through this process has been crucial. There's no way I could have done this on my own. So that was really big. And then everything from developing the theory and the concepts to, okay, packaging it and creating a training program, to marketing and sales, which has been just a whole, learning process. And then, then actually going out and delivering it and guiding corporate teams and sports teams through our 12-week training program, and follow up and just all the things that it takes to run a bit. It's a lot, and it's fun, and I've enjoyed it. I've learned a ton. It's hard. It's really hard. Just like football. If someone would have told me, I tell people, if someone would have told me about walking on, how difficult that would have been, I probably wouldn't have done it at K-State. And if someone would have told me how hard it is to be an entrepreneur, I probably wouldn't have done it. But I'm super thankful that I did, and I'm really enjoying the process, the journey, and some of the fruit from that now.
So break the product down for us and for our listeners who maybe haven't heard of Vision Pursue before. What are the touch points? Who is the customer that you're serving, and what does the actual product look like?
Yeah, great question. So our product is a 12-week mental skills training program. Most of our clients are in the corporate space, so leadership teams, sales teams, operations teams, entire organizations. We also do work in sports, and our program is designed to be a comprehensive mental skills training program. So it's not just mindfulness, it's not just meditation, it's not just emotional intelligence. It's all the mental skills that are required both for improving life experience. We find that a lot of people, most people, are experiencing a typical workday as primarily a stressful means to an end that they want to escape from, which is the way I was experiencing most of living my dream in the NFL, which always surprises people. They thought, like, if anyone's enjoying life, it's got to be someone like Jon McGraw, who's doing what he loves and making good money and living the dream, playing sports. And it was not that way for me. It was not that way for a lot of my teammates and coaches. And just what I routinely see, what we see is a lot of people are struggling. And sometimes it's just the struggle of doing something really hard. And sometimes there's a mental health component, right? And there's way too much anxiety or way too much depression. And there's some simple techniques that we can all learn that can make a really big difference for all of us. So in terms of life experience, and also in terms of performance, right? And not just performance at work, but performance, how we show up in all the important areas of our lives. So that's our 12-week training program. We have some other programming that goes alongside of that, but that's sort of the flagship offering that we have. It's a combination of virtual training, live virtual training like this through Zoom or whatever virtual medium we use. And then we have a mobile app that delivers daily practices. So they're doing about 8 hours of virtual training over those 12 weeks, and then daily practices, 5 to 6 days a week, about 10 to 15 minutes a day on our mobile app. Doing the actual work, which is what it takes to create any type of mindset shift and then behavioral change.
And so you're engaging with corporations and they're supplying this to their employees. Is the 12-week training program done as a group, or is it done as an individual? And then after that program, 12 weeks, is the program over and they just kind of move on? Or, what are the continued touch points?
Yeah, great question. So we almost always work with teams. And we're really big on culture and on enhancing team connection and also team performance. We also find it's really great for accountability, and it's also important to help them develop a common language around these mental skills. So the training we do as in teams, the work on the mobile app, of course, is individual. So that's their own, working on their own game, so to speak, working on their own, training automatic thoughts, training automatic emotions. Learning how quickly you can get a really big shift in life experience and then performance as individuals, and then keep bringing them back together as a team to develop that. So once the 12 weeks is done, then we do have ongoing sort of more advanced training, both virtually. The app continues on. So we have a habit change program that continues on. They have an app license for a year, so they can continue to use that. A lot of times they'll want to do a refresher the next year, or as they're onboarding new employees, we'll train them and get them caught up. And we'll typically, where our group size tends to be around average 40 to 50 people that we go through at a time. We can do as many as a couple thousand at a time if we need to. The sizes tend to be about that though, and then so we'll kind of bounce around inside of an organization and hit the leadership team, and then we'll hit the sales team, and then we'll hit the staff and operations team, et cetera.
So It feels like you are at the intersection of sort of two very important trends that we're seeing in venture generally, right? So one is the idea of like personal wellness and mindfulness. So we've seen meditation apps and, personal wellness and fitness apps. So that's on one end. And the other end is employee wellness, which I feel like in 2020 became such a key component of what everybody was talking about, given that we're all remote, we're all on Zoom calls every day. And, corporate is thinking about, hey, how do we still maintain touch points with the employees? Given that you're sitting at that intersection, help us understand how you picked who the customers were and what that customer discovery process was like for you.
It's a really great question. So early on, we did no customer discovery. It was who would ever pay us to come in and do our work, right? You can't be too picky when you're first starting. So it was a mixed bag. And when we first started this, we thought it would be mostly high-performing professional athletes, sports teams, and then probably the hedge fund space, which is where my business partner comes from. And high transparency, lots of pressure that they're dealing with. And then as we just started to work with whoever would give us a shot early on, we found that this mindset is pervasive, and it's impacting everyone to varying degrees. And so we started working with schools, and we started working with virtually every industry out there, and seeing that there's a really great opportunity for us to positively impact those individuals and teams that are part of those organizations. So now that we're a little bit more established, we can be a little more picky in who we work with, and ultimately we love working with organizations where leadership has determined that they value their people. They place a high value on their people. They believe in developing their people, and they're also looking for an edge. They're looking for a competitive advantage, and they see that this is an untapped part of that, the opportunity for them to really grow and expand and execute on their mission at a higher level.
So Tim and I both have worked in corporate environments, before we became investors. And one of the big things I remember from my corporate days was it was always about measuring impact. If you're going to, invest in something, if you're going to make a concerted effort, there's a KPI somewhere, right? Somebody needs a box to check. When you are working with one of your clients, what is the metric or goal that you're able to show them such that they feel like at the end of the 12 weeks or at the end of the year-long engagement with you, the success, is there?
Yeah. So early on, that was really important. And so one of the big aspects that we measure is that life experience. So what's a typical day typical day feel like for you? And so we measure that before and after, and we're able to get dramatic changes in that typical day. Now, that's all subjective, right? It's someone going through the experience and saying, hey, this is how I felt before the VP program, and here's how I'm experiencing life post. So that's very subjective. Most of our clients don't even ask that. They're not as concerned about that because of the referrals that we're getting. So we have very happy customers that experienced a radical shift in individual mindset and then collective mindset. And then they introduce us to other people that trust them. Right. And ultimately, ideally, we work with leadership first. And once the leadership team experiences this, there's no longer any questions about will this be impactful for our organization, because it's such a different life experience post this, and they can see how the skills can benefit them, and then of course everyone else. And so it's at that point, it's just like, how do we get this to everyone? How do we scale this to the whole organization?
And with like a sports team, for example, is it really just focused on the athletes and their mindset, or does it extend to coaching staff, training staff, maybe even front office executives? Help us understand who this is serving within a sports team.
Yeah, with sports teams, it is everyone. The coaching staff is most important. We spend most of our time there. If we have to choose between a coaching staff and players, we choose coaching staff every day because that's having the biggest impact on team's performance. And ideally, we get to work with all three levels of the organization. But yeah, we work with a lot of coaches and, of course, a lot of professional athletes as well. It's different in sports, so we don't get as much time. The corporate world's used to training, so it's a whole lot easier to come in and execute on a program. It's different. Every sports team we work with is a little bit different. We have to modify things to meet their scheduling demands and just limitations in time that you have with them. So we have a different program. The app has different programs. So we have a professional athlete program in the app. We have a coach program in the app. We have just a regular adult. We have a youth program, et cetera, to try and customize it to meet the needs of those we're working with.
And to kind of take it back to your playing career and give us some very real examples. You'd mentioned, is this something you wish you had? What were some of those things that you faced that Vision Pursue, and mental skills training, what could have really helped you with?
Yeah. So one of the things that I really struggled with was performance anxiety. Had a lot of anxiety leading up to games, leading up to the season, just all the time. And part of that's just the way I'm wired. But a lot of that was based on my psychology. And I didn't realize that the body can't differentiate between me playing in a football game and me visualizing or simulating a football game in my head. So I'll give you an example. On Sundays, we play a game and I'll play however many 40, 50, 60 snaps. And it's been a long week and I'm exhausted. And all I want to do is go home and relax and spend some time with my family and start the recovery process. The problem is that Sunday nights, I don't sleep because I just lay there in my bed and I play the game over and over and over again in my head. And I think about those few bad plays I had and how it cost us the game or almost cost us the game. And I'm dreading Monday where I got to go in and watch the film and get called out and yelled at by my coaches. All right. So all that's going on and I have no idea the impact. I'm not even aware I'm really doing it. And I'm even less aware of the negative impact it's having on my neurology, my physiology, right? I'm releasing way too much additional adrenaline and cortisol in my body, which is increasing inflammation, which is making me way more susceptible to soft tissue injury. It's also just diminishing the experience. I'm not present with my family. I'm not enjoying being home and being with my kids. I get home and all I want to do is go to work, and I get to work and all I want to do is go home. And I'm like, it's just kind of this very complex mess of automatic thoughts and emotions. And most people don't realize this is happening. Back when we used to drive to work, you get in your car, you drive to work and you pull into your parking spot and you can't remember one thing about the drive, right? Or you're on your commute and you get to the train station or the subway and you can't remember one thing about it. And that mind wandering is a really important part of our intelligence. And for most people, they haven't trained it. And so it's doing way more harm than good. But if you've trained it, that mind wandering is an amazing part of your intelligence, and it's working in the background and solving all kinds of problems for you. So I hadn't trained my automatic brain. I didn't know how to respond to emotions once the chemicals got released. They just sat there forever. It takes about 90 seconds if you have a proper response plan to process stress chemicals in the brain and body. That would have been huge for recovery. Being able to connect with my teammates more effectively, it would have been significantly different had I had these skills.
And it's clear how much time you've sort of spent understanding the science behind it. So it's not just about the psychology, but also, again, the physical impact that it's having. When it comes to your team, beyond you and your co-founder, what does the makeup of that look like? Do you have a mix of skill sets that speak to both the sort of, holistic side, but then also the more scientific side? Or how do you present that when you're putting together that 12-week program?
Yeah, it's definitely a mix. So we reference various neuroscientists and health psychologists and use their research to support all of our actual training and the skills that we're teaching. And we bring all of that into the training. So it's heavy in neuroscience, it's heavy in psychology. So we talk a lot about that in the training program, because that's the way I am. Like if you can't show me some kind of science foundation for this, it's going to be a while before I adopt this, or I'm slow to believe. So what's great about MRI brain scans and neuroscience and what we've been able to study with the brain, there's a whole lot more science around a lot of these mental skills than there was even 10 years ago. So it's great that we can go in there and support the training that we do with some really solid science.
And what has the process been like for you? Obviously, early on you said you were just trying to get the right customers on board. Now you've got the referrals moving and the customer acquisition is a little bit easier. Talk to us a little bit about expansion and even, fundraising as a part of that expansion.
That's a really great question. We're in the middle, and we've been in the middle of that for a couple of years, those discussions and strategy discussions around how do we get this to as many people as we can. And we've been from the beginning primarily a consulting or training firm that's supported by technology. We've wanted to push the boundaries of what the technology can do on its own, and it's great that there's apps like Calm and Headspace and some other great apps out there that have demonstrated there's a marketplace for this from a technology standpoint. So we're definitely continuing to develop the technology. We think there's some other ways we can scale the consulting as well. We see the most impact when those are coupled together versus if you just throw an app at an organization. We don't see a lot of benefit there. But when you can combine the two, it's great. So we're working on a video program. We've got a workbook that's almost done as well. We think that there's some opportunities for us to grow both the consulting and the technology at the same time.
Jon, are you guys in a better position when a team has a mental conditioning or skills expert already in place, or are you better fit for an organization that maybe hasn't thought as much about this? And part of the reason I'm asking the question is I don't think our listeners realize this, but basically every MLB baseball team now has a mental skills coordinator or coach. They've really put an emphasis on it. We're starting to see some of the other leagues catch up and do this as well. So I'm curious how that fits into how you interact with the teams.
Yeah, so it's way better if they have a mental skills coordinator in place. It's great that baseball, I think just in the last few years, every team now has it. Other sports teams are still lagging behind, but it's no different. I love asking the question. Let's say, because when people talk about mental skills, especially sports teams, are like, hey, we're going to have an expert come in the summer for a couple of days and kind of talk about it, and then they're gone, right? And I like to ask them, so what if you did that with your strength and conditioning program, right? What if you had your strength and conditioning coach come in for a couple of days in the summer and say, hey, here's the plan, good luck with that? No one would ever do that, right? Because we now know how critical strength and conditioning is to the overall success of the players and the team. In a few short years, mental skills training will be perceived the same way, and there will be a full-time staff devoted to it. And so we work much better when there's a staff in place. Because what we've been able to do is systematize mental skills training. And a lot of times it's done in a reactive way, and even in a sort of a one-on-one way. And it's not done in a, hey, this is what everyone in here needs. And of course, there's some levels of customization you can create, but there's foundational mental skills that every human being, every athlete on a team, every salesperson, whatever it is, needs to know in order to have the best experience possible and get the most out of whatever their talent will allow.
And to Jay's point about expertise, is it fair to say, as it relates to, mental health and clinical psychology, that's probably a separate bucket than exactly what you're focused on? How do you manage that line? Because at the end of the day, it's still the human being at the core. And so that can be challenging when you're so laser focused on the mental skills, but there's maybe bigger, more systematic problems at hand with any given athlete or client.
That's a really great question. Yeah, so we don't do the mental health aspect of this. It's really important to have that available, right, to players and to coaches, and I think even there's elements of that run through our training program, but the focus is really on performance and elevating. So it's kind of taking someone who's in a pretty good place and going to the next level. But I think both are really important. And we don't make that our focus, but it is critical. And a lot of people need that, especially, Jay, you were talking about how 2020 has exposed, a lot of that. And we see some really alarming increases in anxiety disorder and depressive disorder as we're trying to navigate a very new world.
Yeah, and Jon, you've been so gracious with us with your time. One of the things that I would love for our listeners to take away from this conversation is as they are finding themselves, we're ending this new year, everyone's back on Zooms again, and we're going to be in this environment. What are some takeaways that you would have for our listeners today that they can start doing in their life and taking those sort of step-by-steps to have that, better day each day that hopefully stacks into a championship, whatever that means in their life?
Yeah, gosh, there's so many different ways we could go with that. I think because we're talking more about performance and taking things to the next level, I love the work of Dr. Andrew Huberman from Stanford. And if you get a chance to check him out, he's got some really good online stuff. I know he's working on his book, but he's really great. He's a neuroscientist at Stanford and has a lab, and his lab works closely with Dr. Carol Dweck, who's also at Stanford. Growth versus fixed mindset. A lot of people are familiar with growth, this vernacular, and also her philosophy that's been demonstrated in her lab. What's great is Dr. Huberman's work is focused on the neuroscience. And so dopamine is absolutely critical for any high performer. And anytime we lose motivation, it's because dopamine levels have dropped too low. And then there's some ways that we can keep dopamine levels higher. And sleep is one of the biggest ones. So I encourage all your listeners to learn how to get a really good night's sleep. It's critical. But beyond that, some mental skills that Dr. Huberman talks about that are really important. One is, especially when things are really hard, it's reminding your automatic brain. And when I say that, that's kind of the beginning of awareness, is recognizing that I'm not my automatic brain. So it's producing automatic thoughts and automatic emotions all the time, right? And so awareness is recognizing that and changing the relationship that I have with my own automatic brain. And then being able to remind it, just like a coach would or advisor or mentor, that I'm on the right path, right? And anytime you can, your automatic brain believes that you're on the right path, meaning you're moving in the direction that's going to get you what you want, right? It's going to help you get where you want to go. Your brain's going to release dopamine as the reward to say, okay, this is working, right? The hard part is that when we're not getting the external rewards, we're not getting the pat on the back, we're not getting the paycheck, we're not getting the customers running in the door, we start to wonder, are we on the right path? Right. And sometimes we need to take stock of that and say, hey, maybe we need to pivot. Maybe we need to do something different. A lot of times we are on the right path. We just have to remind our automatic brain, this is working. We're on the right path. And the most important time to do that is when it's most difficult. And this is especially important for leaders. If you have new employees, you've got a sales force that you're trying to run, to drive, to improve. If you're a coach, reminding your players, reminding your salespeople that when it's most difficult, that's the good part. Right? That's the good part, and you're on the right path. And so I encourage all the listeners today, remind yourself, whatever your goals are for 2021, you're on the right path. And when it's most difficult, that's the good part. That's when you grow. That's when good things happen.
Well, Jon, that is a fantastic place to end, not just for our listeners that may be, young athletes themselves, but also for all the startup founders and business people that listen to the show every week. So we just want to thank you again for your time, for your honesty, and for sharing these tips with us that I know Tim and I especially are going to start taking into our day-to-day as we, get back into the swing with 2021. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. Congrats on the success with the podcast. Keep up the great work.
Thanks, Jon.
Thank you, Jon.